Just a little early. Don't know how we see if people are here or not.
We have two attendees
Oh, there
already.
are 4 participants. Okay. So there are people here. Let me just pop that up. All right.
Hello,
So
Louise.
for those of you who are just joining us now, we're going to be waiting a few minutes for the audience to join. There's only 4 of us here right now. 5, just went up 1. Thank you for joining. We'll probably start at about 2 or 3 minutes after. So we'll get going. We'll get going then. Last chance to grab yourself a coffee, tea actually, or water. So what's the weather like in London, Charles?
The weather's not too bad actually. It's pretty good for I'm ever the optimist, Brian. So for me it's not too bad. It's pretty good. Yeah. How
Anytime
about
it's I visited a couple of cities. London's one of them, and Vancouver's another. Where the general consensus is it rains all the time. And I've been to London a few times, and I've been to BC and Vancouver quite a few times. And I think it's just a myth that the local population has concocted to keep all the tourists away. Because every time I've been to those places, the weather's been beautiful. It's been gorgeous. So,
well, I could submit that you're right if it wasn't for the fact that it doesn't work. There are lots of tourists. Thankfully as well. We like tourists,
yeah.
really. Yeah.
Well, I know Vancouver has a rainy season. So,
Mm.
and I just happened to not be there during the rainy season, I guess. So, what time are we at? We're just at 10. So, we're going to wait a few more. Thank you for those who've joined on time. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes before we get things kicked off. Do some intros to start, and I'll do a little bit of housekeeping just to make sure you understand where you are in case you're in the wrong webinar. But this is the Ortecha webinar from what did we call this? Can't remember what we called this. From pilots to pole position. So that's what we are. And this is the second in the series. There is one more to come. We had one earlier on, and I'll recap that just a little bit when we get the audience here. One more minute, and then we'll get going. You have plans this weekend, Charles?
Not really, not yet. I might go and stay with my sister-in-law actually. I might go and stay there for a little bit. Just
Nice.
nice relaxing family weekend. How about yourself, Brian?
Well, I have a place up north, just north of Toronto here, so I'm actually heading up there tonight. We have had some flood warnings, so I'm just going to go up and check on the property, make sure everything's okay. So get a couple of things done. Other than that, not much.
Okay, well, I hope there's no flooding.
Yeah, well, we know from pictures there is flooding, but I don't think there's any flooding at my place. So because we're in a bit of a higher property.
Brian, do you know in the chat what this Fireflies AI recording is? Is that something we need to do anything about?
Jan invited Fireflies here to record and take notes by continuing. You agree. Okay, so someone has Jan, whoever Jan is using this app called Fireflies. I've used it in the past to record. So Jan, we will be recording this and sending out the recording. I mean, feel free to record it, but we'll have an official recording that will be sent out as well. So let's get started. My name is Brian McConnell. I'm a partner here at Ortecha. I'm in Toronto. I run the Canadian operations for Ortecha. Charles, you want to give us a little bit of intro in yourself?
Sure, Charles Ivie. I'm head of data and AI engineering at Ortecha, based in the UK, with a long history of semantics, knowledge graphs, and knowledge engineering.
Perfect. So a bit of housekeeping today. We have, and you guys are probably all aware of this, but I'll say it anyways. We have an area for Q&A. So if you want to ask a question, you can do that. There's a Q&A, and it's just up here to my right. So I'll be glancing up there every once in a while. And there is the chat. So feel free to use either. I mean, I know I think it's personally a little confusing when we have both going, but if you want to ask a question, prefer you do it in the Q&A, but pop it in the chat. And chat also is, of course, for you guys to talk or just say some things. As I mentioned, this will be recorded, and we will send out the link at the end of this. So today's topic is data engineering. We did have a webinar 2 weeks ago with our head of AI strategy, Stephen Gatchell. If you missed that and want to get the recording on that, we can just pop a note in the chat and we can make sure that you get that. So Stephen Gatchell and I had a 45-minute conversation around where is AI from a strategy perspective. We are going to switch to more rolling up the sleeves kind of things and getting from strategy down to actually getting things up and running with Charles today. And then the final in the three-part series will be with Sean Russell, who is head of AI enablement here at Ortecha. So we'll talk about what are the things that you actually need to do to make sure that what you're hoping to accomplish is actually accomplished with your AI enablement. So that's kind of the thread we're following. We're going to start off with a poll. I always like to get a little bit of insight into what our audience is. So I'm going to start out with some poll questions. And there we go, launching the poll question. So fairly simple one, just, want to get some idea of your maturity. Where are you in the AI journey? We'll leave this up for a couple of seconds, 10, 15 seconds for you to respond, just so we have some sense of the maturity of the audience. So just let us know if you could just go in there and answer those questions. No one's answering. Is there a problem? Can you people do something? Let me get that out of the way. It's in front of my chat. Okay, it's good. People are okay. Now they're answering. Okay, good. Okay, so Ron, I got your note here. We will send you the recording for session 1. We'll make that happen. Louise is also here in the background, taking notes on stuff like that. And for Damien, we'll do that as well, Damien. Oh, and Mark. Okay, lots of people interested in that. Okay, I'm going to give it a couple more seconds here, and then we'll close the poll. We're up to 9 respondents, 10. Okay, I'm going to end that poll. There's a couple more questions, so I'll end that one and share the results there. So, this is kind of what I expected. You got people that are using ChatGPT and Copilot internally. It makes sense. We got some, next level, we got some AI-driven workflow. A few are more advanced. And of course, I like the last one is that we're thinking we're advanced, but secretly, I guess I'm worried we're not, right? So always a little worried about that one. So that's kind of what I expected. Charles, does that surprise you in any way?
No, that's what I expected.
Yeah, okay. All right. So that's good. You are what we thought you were. So let me stop sharing that. And this question here. Okay. No. Okay. That's not. Sorry, I'm having trouble going to the next poll question. Hmm. Let's end that. Back here. Go back to polls. That's not happening.
I think all the four questions are in the same poll.
Oh, are they? Oh,
Yeah.
I missed. Oh my goodness. Okay, and I deleted it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
we still got some decent results there. I mean, I was particularly interested with the fact that there were quite a lot of people who were on the call who already understood or who already had a grasp on what things like ontologies, semantic layers, those sorts of things are, agentic.
Okay.
Some good confidence around those subjects, which is good to know.
Okay. Oh, thanks. I missed that. Rookie. Okay, Charles. So you've got a sense of what the audience is looking at. So high level, Charles, where are we? What's happening in the AI engineering space? I mean, we're all saying from this from the surveys we've seen and from our talk last time with Stephen,
Mhm.
we were hoping that 2025 would be the year we'd move from the sandbox into production. And yeah, some of that happened, but nowhere near as much as we thought.
Mm.
Is 2026 going to be the year? And if it is, what kind of, at a high level, what has to happen to make us kind of take that next step?
So I think it's actually still quite rare to see really well executed production systems in place. Certainly, it is for us from when we arrive at customers for the first time. There are obviously some good examples where things do work very well. And I guess what I'm really speaking about is systems which are developed internally, not just things which are off the shelf. So things which people are doing internally, created RAG systems or Gen AI systems that meet expectations. It's quite a lot of there's quite a few initial deployments of things, but there's still quite a lot of work to do.
Okay. Okay. So do we have a good foundation in place? And are we kind of now we just need to build on that foundation, or is there something lacking in the foundation?
Um, I think with some of the underlying reasons are probably the same underlying reasons that there always have been for applications not fulfilling their potential as quickly as we'd like. Things like not really having a good grasp and a good understanding of your data landscape. That becomes more pronounced, more prominent right now than ever before, I think, because of the fact that it gets exposed uh, so well through language model constructs and these kinds of interfaces that are so free flowing in their interaction.
Right.
If I have a conversation with you as a person, we can free form on any sort of thing we're discussing. And I think one of the most widely built tools now is a chatbot. Right?
Yeah.
So it's quite easily exposed when something doesn't appear to behave the way you expect it to behave.
Right.
So in some ways, it's easier to see where things are not as mature as they should be in the data. They become exposed a little bit more quickly. I suspect that's always, that's been the case in many organizations for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, you can probably tell from my gray hair or lack of hair. I've been doing this a long time. The problems that we're seeing are not unique. They're not new.
Mm,
We've been wrestling with them
mm,
since computers kind of came into being. AI in my kind of thinking, AI has
mm,
just magnified these problems. It's just
mm,
it is making it obvious to a lot more people.
mm,
Part of the challenge for businesses on the business side back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s was the IT guys held all the secrets, right? And the business guys had to fight to get the secrets. And then we got things like, I think I have my phone out. We got things like these, and the businesses all of a sudden, wait a minute, we just need an app for that, right? Can't we get an app for increase revenue, decrease cost, and mitigate risk? I'm being facetious, but so that gave the end users more power. And I think what AI is doing is just magnifying the problems that have always existed. One of my concerns right now is that we've always struggled to get data correct, to get the right data. And I think, and to manage that data. And I think we're going to hit with the amount of data that AI is consuming and producing. We're going to hit a knee of a curve where we will not be able to manage our AI, our data manually anymore. So I think, all in all, these problems are not new. We need to solve them, and this is just magnifying the challenges and the shape. So, what are you seeing out there with clients that you're working with that is helping them get from that sandbox into production? What are some of the kind of foundational pieces that we need to get in place?
Well, I'm not sure necessarily that getting from sandbox to production is the issue. It's not the functional process of doing that, of course. I think it's
Okay.
because it's up to you, I guess. It is up to you as an organization to choose when to press the button, right? When to decide that what you have as an application is suitable for consumption, and whether that's an internal or an external application will depend on, and many other factors will influence that decision. But I think that, as we've already mentioned, when they do get to production, especially with things which are built around generative AI models, the flaws that exist within them can be easily exposed sometimes. So
Mm,
those flaws can be quite vivid in some circumstances. So the question then is, what does success mean really in these circumstances? So I almost prefer to think of it as, if things are in production, then are they satisfactory? And if they're not, what is it that's making them unsatisfactory? And taking a step backwards from there. If they're not in production, then what makes them unsatisfactory to have not been put into production yet? So I suppose,
mm,
and for me, it always still comes back to understanding and uh, knowing, really knowing your data landscape well enough. How well have you organized things? Sure, if you have good data management principles in place, then that would take you a massively long way down the road to be able to understand your data landscape and do these things. But all the way down to a fundamental level of, do you really know how your data is connected? Do you have you considered modeling things outside of the construct of applications?
mm,
um, th- how deeply have you really thought about your most valuable commodity when dealing with a language model which is built on structures which it's trained on, right? How deeply have
mhm,
you cared about what the information you've given to this new tool of yours? Or have you just thrown it all in and
mm,
wondered what will come out at the end? So,
mhm. Yeah, I mean, certainly when I first heard about data lakes, I was at an
mm,
Oracle conference in New York, I don't know, many years ago, and I first heard about data lakes, and I'm like, I don't get it. Like, okay, we're gonna take all the stuff we got in all these silos, and we're gonna throw it in one big silo, and then some magic happens, and like I really didn't understand how that helped. And I got the scale issue, okay, we need to buy more, you know, storage, DASD, for those of you who've been around as long as I have. But we didn't. But really didn't get this. Oh, it's going to save lots of money. I thought, okay, no, Oracle
mm,
doesn't do this kind of stuff to save money for clients. They do it to
mm,
make money for themselves. I'm not picking on Oracle. They're all like that. So, what are some of the kind of key failures that you're seeing
mm.
that clients could avoid, if they had spoken to Charles Ivie in his words of wisdom?
Well, if I may just take a little step back, which I think is completely related. Your example or your description of a data lake.
Yeah.
Thinking about this the other day, and it reminds me very much of the story that we're trying to prove, which was proved very, very difficult, about the creation of life on Earth. Right?
Right.
So, supposedly, the theory is you take lots of chemical components, lots of things which are seemingly unrelated. You have no idea how they're going to connect together or how they should. If you throw them into a big vat of enough things and shake it for long enough, out pops an amoeba. Right? Now, I don't know how long you have to shake this bucket for before you get some sort of meaningful organism, but
Right.
it seems that it's very, very difficult to replicate. So possibly you do need some, who knows, maybe you do need some sort of other external factor to influence that jump from a jumble of meaningless data to something
Right.
which is joined together, which has some sort of value in its universe.
Right.
And I think that provides a pretty good analogy for why it's so important to have good. Why it's so important to have, if you like, an overseeing, knowledgeable entity which will be able to piece these things together. Now, you may think of that as being a person or somebody who's doing that, but there's a structure there that has to be put in place, right? So in our world, that we could almost think of that as an ontology, right? So you take a data lake and throw a load of things in there which unconnected together mean very little, and shake it for long enough, you might get a few right answers, but most of them will be nonsense.
Right.
Now, if you were to take some time, if a knowledgeable entity was to take some time to look over what's in there, and even without moving any data, even without doing anything, if they're able to understand and draw a structure that they understand resides within it and point to where that is, you have a foundational knowledge of being able to introspect that data in a meaningful way. So for me, the abstract nature of designing ontological models, which to those on the call who might not be familiar with them, think of it like an abstract schema, a mind map of how things may be related to one another. To be able to design and document something like that people and machines alike could use to introspect that meaningless jumble of data underneath, providing a lens of clarity to be able to actually interoperate with it. I think that's a very important factor, and I think something which has been overlooked. So going back to, or overlooked in some cases, actually, I'm glad to say, not as often as I think, because I think there was at least 4 or 5 people on the webinar questionnaire who said that they already knew what ontologies were and semantic layers, which means that many of these concepts are now more widely used than they previously were, of course.
Perfect. Yeah. I mean, again, I always liken ontologies to, computers think in rows and columns.
Mm-hmm.
People don't think in rows and columns. People think in terms of relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can marry the rows and columns thinking with the relationships thinking, that gives us a very, very powerful, I think that's kind of a, one light definition of neurosymbolic. You're combining the left side of the brain with the right side of the brain, and that becomes extremely powerful, right? It allows you to do Google, right? Or all these, big engines that are out there that do this kind of stuff. So, I think what you're kind of telling the audience here is that you need to get a better understanding of what your data is and what the business meaning of that data is. Is that fair? Is that kind of the first step to be productionizing AI? Does that make sense?
I think it has to be, because it was. I'm pretty sure it was Steve Jobs and then Jeff Bezos as well, in a different form, that were all of the opinion that in the end, the most thing that's important is the interface, is the way that people are you want to interact with in the first place, right? So working backwards from what the business really needs from that perspective, to go into. Now, if you think about it, that's very similar to designing some sort of ontological model over something. It's how do I want to interact with what exists underneath, and then it's a question of sort of trying to map and understand how that relates to it. And another interesting point which you mentioned in there is the value of the relationships themselves. So
Right.
we don't often, you mentioned relational data stores and things like that. Quite often in those traditional mechanisms of storing data for machines, we ignore the most important part of the construct of recording that data, which is the relationship between things.
Right.
So sure, some data formats are valuable just in themselves. You know, you have some models which are so straightforward and so simple in their structure that they don't need much of a relationship, but even they have a relationship within themselves, whereby you're identifying someone that has, for example, you know, you still need to understand that a thing has a name. If
Yes.
you think about it, the construct of the name, that predicate in the middle, is still a relationship between a subject and an object. You know, I
Yep.
think about in a language sense that still exists. Yet we kind of ignore those. Oh, it's just a property. Or when you have larger constructs of data, uh, relating tables to one another, things like that. The relationship between a table, it's an unfortunate consequence that you have to put into your model. So I'm going to have to create a foreign key and a primary key, and what shall I call them and how shall I join them together? And they don't really have a name, and I don't care what they are because they're just annoying. But actually, if you think about it, it's the nature of the relationship between those two things which carries the most meaning. So I think that's one of the key, most important things, which ontologies give us as an overlaying factor, which underlying storage mechanisms constantly ignore.
Yeah. I mean, we've all got tons of stories about programs and projects we've run where, defining the business meaning of the data has if not, you know, taken the project right off the rails, at least delayed it by months, right?
Mm,
Um, we had one example where, this client was trying to stand up a new CRM,
mm,
and they couldn't agree on the definition of client.
mm, mm,
7 different operating units across their lines of business, 7 different meanings of customer, client, etc.
mm,
And in the end, like the project failed because they couldn't actually come to a nice, clean definition of customer. And you
mm.
think about that, and you think, how complicated can that be? Like it just can't be that complicated. It is,
It turns
but
out
until
it.
we get that, business understanding of what is a client, what is a customer, what's the difference between a client in this line of business versus this line of business,
Mm,
we really haven't got a good understanding of what we're doing.
mm,
So, yeah, I couldn't agree more that that the data is foundational, and getting to that business meaning of data
mm,
is
mm,
critical
mm,
to actually moving forward in this new world.
mm,
So, how do we do that, Charles? I mean,
mm,
how do we
mm.
how do we how do we make
Yeah.
that happen?
So,
We've
so
got
yeah,
petabytes of
some
data out there from organizations, right?
Yeah, and so some of the techniques we're using now to help do this, which we've honed actually over many years, if I'm honest, certainly in the symbolic AI sphere, um, I'm calling it symbolic AI. Really, I'm talking about building ontologies and working in knowledge graphs. And we did that for a long time anyway, but we didn't have any large language models to help us. So we were fiddling around for many months trying to build our own machine learning models and natural language processing pipelines and things like that instead, to try to do what language models do so well. But we've been doing it for a while. So the good thing is we have actually, to a certain extent, streamlined some of these processes that we need to do, because we've understood for a long time that you need to have um, a glossary. You need to have an understanding of your vocabulary that you want to be able to communicate with. You need to understand the concepts to which you care about. You need to have this understanding of your landscape of data in order to be able to apply natural language processing, machine learning, these kinds of things, creating graphs that fit to these models. So we've really, in recent years, we've just been taking that to our customers in a slightly more efficient manner, because now we have access to language models to help us along the way. But the processes that we're using are based around the principles of designing ontological models that are satisfactory towards use cases first, not trying to boil the ocean, focusing on the business objectives, and then using as streamlined processes and the tooling and things like that we have to go from idea to proof of value as quickly as possible, and then iterate. And I think in many ways we follow the classic software development lifecycle approach, but we apply it to ontologies and graphs.
Cool. Okay. We actually have some questions come in. So Ron has, and Ron's broken this up across some four questions here. So getting agreement on and I'm looking at the questions up here, so I'm not ignoring you. Getting agreement on comprehensive business subscriptions have, in my eyes, been one of the biggest roadblocks. Absolutely. The human in the loop. How can this be addressed, especially in large organizations pursuing an enterprise-wide model? And then he comments, I've been using LLMs to generate multiple comprehensive business descriptions based on industry knowledge and context and present them to stewards to choose from versus asking them to provide one. Open versus closed questions. Yes, exactly. Yeah, that makes sense, Ron. So we're currently engaged in a project at a large organization that ingests financial information, turns around and presents that to their clients. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about, Charles.
Yeah, of course.
And do you want to talk a little bit about what we're doing there? So at a very high level, they have 200,000 business terms. How many of them are duplicates? How many of them are useless? How many of them should have been sunset 20 years ago? Like all that kind of stuff. So Charles, what are we doing there that might be of interest to the audience?
So it's still based around the principles of ontological modeling, really. The idea is semantics. What's the real underlying meaning? There is certainly a need to know when to stop and what is too much and what is too little. So we've got some very thorough pipelines in place, for example, that will go through a set of business terms, perform some analytics on those business terms, do a bunch of different things using cosine similarity, using various different mechanisms to try to identify things which are the same, things which mean the same, things which actually might be slightly different because of what they're connected to, all sorts of other mechanisms. And you can, there's a Pareto curve distribution set of success there. So there's going to be a sweet spot. How much processing do I go through in order to try to satisfy that 80% is enough, 90% enough, because probably the last 10% might not even be achievable. So there's all sorts of decisions you have to make with people in the loop to decide what those thresholds are, right? How much effort is going to. But the tools are definitely there. So we do have the tools available to us to take a set of comprehensive business descriptions, decide to a certain automated degree which ones we think can be conflated, which can be thrown away, which are correct, and involve a human in the loop without too much trouble to do the validation. That tooling is there. For me, an interesting thing which is important is retaining the provenance and lineage from whence they came. Because if you have, so for some of the ontological models we're defining contain those provenance models, those taxonomies of terms they came from that came together. So if down the line somebody from department X says, hang on a minute, you called that a customer, that's not a customer, how dare you call that a customer, that's actually a purchaser, they're completely different, and then you can say, okay, well, fine, we can just trace that back through the lineage of, say, for example, if you have a nice knowledge graph there or something, which would be my preferred mechanism, then you could go back and choose that and say, all right, fine, you know what, from now on, for you can call that a purchaser. And we're just going to accept both those business terms for this particular time. Or if you really want, you can get that person in a room with the other person, and maybe they can battle it out, as you said, Ron, for the next 5 years and maybe come to a conclusion.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, back to Ron's comment, this last one, open versus closed questions. I mean, what we're doing with this client that I referenced, we're going through these lists. They have
Mm,
200,000. We're currently working with a list of 60,000, and we're prioritizing. We have a list of 70. I don't know what the list is at right now. It's probably higher, but last I checked, it was 7,500 business terms where we think these are duplicates.
mm,
So having someone kind of just eyeball that, make sure it's
mm,
human in the loop or human in the lead is a new term I've heard,
mm,
and confirm that those are duplicates and we can do it. But to your point, I think it's also, oh, so let me finish that thought. And then, of course, we're continuing to work, refining our model to find out, how many more can we get, how many more can we eliminate or with
mm,
confidence say that they are duplicates. And we have a confidence measure on that. And then you
mm,
have to say, okay, at some point, there's a bunch of terms that we don't know for sure if they're duplicates, and that's where you have to kind of get the human in there to really crawl through and do
mm,
that comparison. But it's eliminating the ones that are, you know, we're pretty confident. It's a massive win for this client because if they can get rid of those, for example, at this point, 7,500. That's a massive win. That's a lot of work that has been done by the models that doesn't have to be done by humans, and that, of course, ripples down through all their systems, all their processes, etc. So it's a huge win.
mm.
Um,
I think
so
some part of it also just comes down to enabling human nature to take control of these scenarios. So by that
yeah,
I mean, if you do have some sort of system which contains a human in the loop, and then that human has the responsibility to choose what is the right way forward. We've all been
yeah,
in those sorts of situations where you're presented with three options, and you take the authority to do so. And you know what? In 95% of the time, most people won't go back and question that and need to change it. So by putting
yeah,
mechanisms in place that empower people to make decisions, quite often those decisions can thankfully be put to bed.
yeah, yeah. So Ron, I think we're all agreeing you're on the right track.
Yeah.
It's not about dumping out a bunch of terms and saying, okay, what are the duplicates? It's giving information to people so that they can make decisions between A, B, C, or A and B to make
Mm,
that happen. And then, as Charles is talking about, and then keeping that construct in place so that we don't have that problem going forward. So now that we have a definition for client versus customer, and they're two different things. We agree in this organization that we have a customer and we have a client, and they're different. We now going forward know that for a new person or organization that comes into us as a relationship, we have a choice. They can be a customer, they can be a client. They can't be anything else, right? Unless you have to or if they are going to be something else, we have to make a pretty serious decision on that and what are the constructs that have to go around that. So it stops that replication. I remember one time we were doing this is way back. Guys, remember Sarbanes-Oxley back in 2003, 2004? We came across this. We were trying to define critical data elements. We came across this thing called a Madoff indicator. It's like, oh, that sounds important. What is that? Okay, we don't know. There's no documentation. It seems to be blank, one, or zero. Don't know. We dug in. Turns out it was a copy of the West Coast indicator. Okay. Is there an East Coast indicator? No. Okay. We ended up in an EVP's office. It took us like 3 months to get on this guy's calendar, understandably. And he says, oh, yeah, I was the analyst when we did that. That was a test field. Funny name, I know. You can ignore that. But, those are the kinds of challenges we have with our data. And that's the kind of thing you want to get rid of, right? You just don't want those things hanging around. I mean, that's a funny example. But
mm. Yeah, well, it
anyway,
sounds,
thanks for the
sounds like
question, Ron.
it sounds very quantum. You had yes, no, or I don't know yet.
Exactly, exactly. And I have my suspicions on where that came from that I won't go into, but I'm sure it involved a regulator asking the question. You have a Madoff indicator, don't you? Right. So okay. So we've got kind of 5 minutes left. Thank you for the question, Ron. Any other questions? Please pop them in there. Okay, Ron's in here again, which is great.
I actually I marked Ron's questions as live because I think we went through quite a lot of as
Yeah.
answered as I think we went through quite a lot of them. But Ron, if you had any more questions, then you're welcome to ask them
He
if you
does
like.
have one. He says, we've moved away from business terms towards business concepts
Mm,
with attributes, formerly
mm.
terms, to simplify the models. What's your opinion on that, Charles?
You know what? It's difficult to say because the they could be considered the same things in different circumstances, right?
Yeah.
And in many ways, in fact, as more of a software engineer and somebody who's come from that background, and not as a data management professional myself, as much as maybe you and some of my colleagues like Stephen last week, they're probably better qualified to answer something like that. Business concept to business term. I mean, I suppose to me, a concept is something more like an entity that can be that can have many of it. There may be many instances of a concept, whereas a term is some sort of label or attribution to a thing. So I think it would depend to me on whether or not I want to have a set of labels against a thing. So a concept might be person, and in a more abstract sense, and a term about that concept might be a name. So I probably wouldn't create a concept called name unless I was going to disseminate name into many things, right? So unless
Right.
I was disseminate name into, say, first name, second name, and family name or something. So it probably depends on the circumstance. So I probably wouldn't consider. See, the more you think about it, the deeper you can go with these things, right?
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't actually make definitive decisions to move away from terms to go to concepts or vice versa. I'll probably just try to be as accurate as I can for my own modeling needs, what should be a concept and what should be a term.
Yeah. I mean, my when that question is asked, my mind goes to regulations. So regulations come very broadly in two forms. They can come as a principle,
Mm-hmm.
or they can come as a rule.
Mm-hmm.
Principle means you have to, which I'm relating to concept, you have to be able to satisfy the regulator that you have addressed that principle.
Mm-hmm.
Many different organizations can go about doing that in many different forms, but at the end of the day, you still have to have a a, a workflow, a lineage, a construct that goes back to here's the elements that I used to form this opinion,
Mm-hmm.
uh, which led me to satisfy your principle regulation, your regulation in principle. So, and I think about some of the regulations that we've worked on through the years, and
Mm-hmm.
it's always challenging. You always have to get the right set of people in the room to decide what is this regulation asking, and then driving down to what is the actual data that's going to have that. Another one of the things we're working on. We've got about 5 minutes left, so again, throw your questions in. Another client we're working on, Charles, they have this is a regulation, and one of the things that they're worried about is that when their analysts are um, are trying to respond to that regulation,
Mm-hmm.
they want to make sure that they're using the most current internal documentation
Mm-hmm.
and that there is a lineage that goes along with that and a versioning, if you will, that goes along with that. So that if the regulator comes along 2 years from now and says, okay, you made that decision at that point in time, what are the pieces, what are the elements that you use to make that decision?
Mm-hmm.
How are we helping them with that? What's the approach we're taking on that?
Mm-hmm. Um, I think there are many different approaches to it. The approach that I take for lineage and provenance is to follow standardized models. So if there is a proven way of recording provenance that is likely to be usable and understood by language models, for example, then I'd rather use that than something else. So from a engineers and an architect's perspective, I try to fit typically to the Provo model or the or DCAT and DPROD and these kinds of things to understand the lineage and provenance of models and patterns, I guess. Can I just draw your attention, Brian? There's a couple of questions in the
I
chat.
just saw those in the chat, Charles. So why don't you jump? Let's go to Damien's.
Yeah, we'll go to
Uh,
David. We've only got a couple of minutes left, I think.
yeah, exactly. So Damien's basically asking, okay, we got this pressure
Yeah,
to get out of the sandbox and get
yeah,
into production.
yeah.
So how do we do that? How do we get from POVs to ROI, if you will?
So you develop the process for the proof of value is just the prototype that you're going to iterate over to increase the value of everything you have. So it's not a singular proof of value, really. It's just the first step in a repeatable development life cycle. So I see it a bit like that, like an agile project. So of course, as you say, POVs can help, sure, but they help because they should be the first part of the iterative process. So for us, we use that POV to set in place the framework, the methodology, and the mechanisms necessary to prove value over time, not just the initial 1, 2, 3 weeks of that proof of value, if you like. So I don't really like the term proof of value sometimes. It feels like it's somehow contained, it feels like it's
Yeah, yeah,
somehow restricted.
yeah.
In fact, AWS have changed from calling them proof of values and proof of proof of
Concept.
concepts to other things now. They call them all sorts of abstract things like enterprise business accelerators and things like this because they don't
Mhm.
like to box to enclose them. So I think that's the right way to think about it. So there is pressure to deliver and build over time, sure, but if you keep showing value, if you can iterate and keep showing increased value over time, then that pressure decreases, just like
Yeah,
releasing pressure on a valve, right? That's what you're doing all the
yeah,
time. And I think
yeah.
with the
One of the things, and
yeah,
Charles will know this because I'm known in Ortecha as the guy that says this all the time. There's no such thing as an AI project. There's no such thing as an IT project. There's no such thing as an operations. They're all business projects.
mm,
Business projects have one of three business outcomes:
mm,
increase revenue, decrease cost, mitigate risk.
mm,
Have an impact can be a force. So that's your charitable stuff, your community stuff. Yes, but generally it's increase revenue, decrease cost, and
mm,
mitigate risk. And if you can articulate the value in those terms, then business people will pay attention.
mm,
If you're trying to stand up an AI agent and all you're doing is standing up an AI, I had one friend that I was coffee that I was having with a CIO probably a year and a half ago, and they were translating documents from English to French, their contracts, and they called it an AI project. It's a good project, but
mm.
calling it an AI project, he says, that's a stretch. Come on. But everybody's jumping on board because, oh, it's got an AI label on it, right?
That's how you get funding, Brian. I mean, that's it.
So there is a bit of marketing involved in here. So, there is a way to articulate value in a way that means, and I think as data practitioners, we talk
Mm,
about, the enterprise becoming more data literate. I think
mm,
as data practitioners, we need to become more business literate. We need
mm,
to be able to express ourselves in business terms so that the business starts to buy in from
mm,
a business perspective, and we can articulate those things from a business perspective.
mm,
So, yeah, Mark
mm.
agrees. So
Oh, yeah. Hello, Mark.
that's good. So we're at time. Thank you very much. Charles, you have one last thought you want to leave with people?
I was just going
Winning
to say,
number
yeah,
stock.
sure. If you'd like to, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. Adam, you had a question that we didn't answer. I'll be delighted to answer it. Otherwise, please reach out to us. I'll be speaking at the Knowledge Graph conference in New York in a couple of weeks' time. So, and some of my friends there as well from AWS would be delighted to see you there. So,
Perfect. Great. So next seminar, AI enablement, is in 2 weeks. Thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate your feedback. Louise will get out a little feedback form to you and would love to hear what your thoughts are. We're always trying to improve and always trying to do better. Thank you very much for your time and have a great day.
thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.